Hello and welcome to Cover Story. Today we have with us Congress leader Milind Deora. We're going to be talking to him about his Janmbhoomi Bombay, his Karmbhoomi the Congress, and a whole lot in between. You know, recently Prime Minister Modi has launched this big startup scheme, Startup India schemes. And this is something that, has been welcomed a lot. But President Pranab Mukherjee has said, I own up for the delay, which means he's a former congressman. So does that mean the Congress delayed in launching something?
I'm not sure in what context the President made that statement. But when we talk of startups today, and at least when I saw the Startup India launch a few days ago, it's really around internet startups, which is really the flavor of the season today. But we have to remember that these companies, the large e-commerce companies in our country today, the large taxi aggregators in our country, the disruptive internet companies that we see being founded each and every day, and some of which have reached large scales, they weren't formed yesterday or a year ago. Companies like Flipkart and Snapdeal were formed many, many years ago, when UPA was in power also. So to me personally, I don't see it as a UPA versus NDA issue at all. I think the fact that when we were in power, we laid the ground for creating a telecommunications infrastructure rollout, which would empower hundreds of millions of people, and which, to the NDA's credit and to Modi Sarkar's credit, they're taking forward. That on its own built the infrastructure for the startup community, the startup ecosystem to be formed and to flourish. In fact, when I saw some of the initiatives that the Prime Minister launched, they launched a few tax incentives and other policies for the startup community. I think my interactions with the startup world when I was a MOS of the Ministry of Communications and IT is what's really most important to them is not really incentives. The laws already exist in this country. They're really looking for a level playing field where they're not being harassed, where they're allowed to compete on a level playing field with the large established companies. And I think that really is what the startup community needs much more than tax incentives.
No, but fair enough, in fact Rahul said a lot of these things also during his interaction in Bombay. But my point is that if you people had begun this, it's come a bit late. Either you take credit, you didn't market it properly, or you didn't think of it properly earlier. Which one is it?
Well, Priya, to be fair, a lot of these initiatives and schemes and these flagship programs of this government that we're hearing about today have all been founded or started up when UPA was in power. But I think, repackaging things and calling it Startup India are well and good to have one event at Vigyan Bhavan, call a few familiar faces, venture capitalists, get your photo in the newspaper. But ultimately the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in really getting the right human resources into government who can implement and execute schemes that you want to sort of proliferate in this country. So when we talked of Aadhaar, for instance, and we said conceptually we want to allow for subsidies to be given more efficiently to the people of India, to eliminate wastages, etc. We could have had an event at Vigyan Bhavan. The Prime Minister could have made a very elaborate speech on it, got his photograph in the newspaper the next day. But instead of doing that, we brought in someone like Nandan Nilekani from the private sector, asked him to run this, and that's why we've been able to deliver in the last several years. So I have no problem with the government repackaging our schemes. I think every government is entitled to do that. I have no problem with the government having a large event to make people aware of those schemes. I think even that's an important part, and that's good that they're doing that. But I'm a little concerned about how they will go about executing and implementing what they promised in their manifesto a year and a half ago and what they're setting out to achieve while they're in government. I think for that, I see a serious problem of human resources in this government. And I don't see them being able to bring people from the private sector and other areas laterally into government. And frankly, I don't see them having the bench strength that we did when we were in power.
Well, that's an interesting argument, because a lot of people are saying that Team Modi lacks, people who actually deliver things. But his argument to that is, at least I've got a team of clean people, people who don't come with the baggage of, as in Congress, there were a lot of ministers who fell to that, either whether it was a Shashi Tharoor or a Ashok Chavan, there were a lot of people who fell victim to that. So do you get experienced people who come with a baggage, or you get young entrepreneurs?
Baggage is firstly very relative because our ministers, some of them were perceived to have baggage because when they were in controversies and when they were in power and in government and scandals came out revolving around their public office, we took a decision to sack them. We took a decision to remove them from our public office. I think Prime Minister Modi has a very different strategy, which is when controversies arise relating to his ministers, and in some cases, serious cases of corruption even, serious cases of...
So far, no serious case of corruption has come up.
I think there have been some very serious cases against serious senior members of his cabinet. I mean, the Lalit Gates controversy, for instance, was a very serious issue. But I think the Prime Minister's strategy is more to sort of dig his heels in and shield his ministers and not allow them to be sacked. So I don't think he has the similar standards of probity that we do. But I think what happens when you have those standards of probity where you ask a minister to step down is you then get perceived as having ministers with baggage, when actually it's the opposite, it's the other way around.
On probity anyway, we'll have an election coming up, so we'll know who stands where on that in terms of perception. But I want to just come back to the startup point. You had Jairam Ramesh yesterday speak in their press conference. He was criticizing the fact that the Prime Minister was setting a fund aside for the startups, saying that instead this money is better used for agriculture, for welfare schemes. Now isn't that a big problem with the Congress, that you spend too much energy on social sector schemes and not enough to give the right message to the corporates?
Look, on the startup side, creating, as I said, financial incentives, I'm not sure if the startups want money from the government. I think even the biggest venture capitalists and largest investors in the startup world in India, people like Nikesh Arora and others, made it quite clear that if you have a good idea that's trying to solve problems, money will find you. And there's enough money in the private sector, both in India and abroad, to invest in these spaces, and that's where money has been coming from. So I don't think the government should be looking at the startup world and boosting entrepreneurship by saying we're going to create a fund. The government will never be an effective fund manager as compared to the private sector. I think what the government should do is ease doing business. They should do away with hurdles that entrepreneurs face every day.
Hurdles that have been set in play by so many years of Congress rule.
By every government, by the nature of our bureaucracy.
3/4 of it is your government.
I mean, it's not about who's in power for longer. I mean, they were in power for 6 years when Mr. Vajpayee was in power. They're in power for the last year and a half. It involves state governments. So to me, when I talk to entrepreneurs who are looking to start up a business, they really want ease of business. They're not saying government find us access to capital. Okay. So maybe the government has got it a little wrong in that sense.
Okay, speaking of startups, I'm now moving on to, you must have heard the BJP spokesman line on Rahul Gandhi. That's a startup who failed to take off. And my line is that he has 3 angel investors, if you call them, apart from Sonia Gandhi. He's had people like Sam Petroda, Suman Dubey, Digvijay Singh, so many people looking out for him, invested in him. Yet, that startup hasn't really happened.
Firstly, I don't know if you can call Rahul Gandhi a startup.
What would you call
He's
him?
been in politics for 12 years now. He was first elected to Parliament in 2004. This conversation about Rahul Gandhi in terms of is he doing enough, should he do more?
When will he take off? Haven't we had every interview of yours, I think I asked you this one question.
And I'm happy to answer that every time, but I think those questions have been answered, by people like me, they've been answered by him directly. I mean, as much as people like us may have believed that he should have gotten into government, perhaps in 2009 when UPA 2 came to power, there is also another side to the argument, which is at one level the media, for instance, and the BJP would accuse the Prime Minister of being a weak Prime Minister. If Rahul Gandhi, for instance, got into government, would that be perceived to be strengthening the Prime Minister's office, weakening the Prime Minister's office? All of these things are very relative. In hindsight, you can go back and say you should have done this, should have done that. But to use a startup analogy, the fact that you're talking about who's invested in him, the fact that the media is still invested in him and is still so speculative on what Rahul Gandhi is doing, that to me is encouraging enough that there's interest And that's what a startup needs ultimately. It needs interest from a consumer, it needs interest from investors.
But we are interested because he is the leader of your party. You know, you make somebody else, you make Digvijay Singh or a Milind Deora or a Sachin Pilot, we'll be invested more in that person.
I'm
So
not
it's
sure if
because
you
you've
would.
put
I'm
him
not
up.
sure if Milind Deora was the leader of the Congress party, you would be as interested as you are in Rahul Gandhi. And
Why not? It's the nature of the party. It is the largest party.
But that's also his USP, which is that he commands interest. Um, so you
It's
know.
not the nature of the personality, it's not the nature, I think the nature of the post, which is my problem, or a lot of the media problem with him, that he is not living up to the post.
Well, I think, Priya, I think when you say he's not living up to the post, the best way to judge whether he's living up to the post is electorally. The party has suffered major defeats, but the party has suffered major victories also. Party has suffered has gained a lot of victories also.
Where, Milind?
In 2009,
Since
I'll tell you, for instance, in 2009 when he led the UP election campaign, Congress got its highest tally in the Lok Sabha elections. We got 20 plus seats, which was, you would agree, was totally unexpected. There have been elections where...
But what did he do with that mandate?
No, so let me answer this.
That's when he made that argument of yours. He could have stepped into
it's
government.
It's not something he had to do. He was not in government.
But
there
you're
was
giving
a
him the
government.
credit for the victory, so then if
But
it's
his
win, then what did he do with that win?
But his job as a politician, it's Amit Shah, for instance, in the BJP, has to deliver results for the party politically. But Prime Minister Modi has to...
the face of the BJP is still Modi.
Of course it is, but the face of the leader of the organization is Amit Shah. But the leader of the government in terms of delivering those schemes and those promises has to be Prime Minister Modi. There was a distinction in our party as well. Rahul Gandhi was not the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was not the Vice President or a senior campaigner of the Congress party who was managing the organizational affairs. So, there have been elections where Rahul Gandhi has taken interest, campaigned vigorously, where we've done extremely well. There have been elections, I admit, where we've not done well. But that's part and parcel of politics. Prime Minister Modi campaigned so aggressively in the Bihar state elections, and they got such a massive drubbing. Does that mean the Prime Minister should sit at home and you should say he's a failed startup? That's not the way politics works.
The difference between Modi and Rahul is, what I would see, is the consistency. Modi, yes, didn't do well in Bihar, but at least he's still consistent. Rahul comes and goes. We don't know, is he here tomorrow? Will he be here in the budget session? Can you answer that? When is his next holiday? I mean, you may answer that. You went on the holiday.
You're talking about consistency. What consistency are we seeing in this government? Please tell me that. Today you talk about foreign policy, for instance. Talk about our next door neighbor. Where is the consistency in foreign policy? With Prime Minister Modi, for instance, and his government, there have been so many inconsistencies. We can have an interview for 2 hours about his inconsistencies.
No, this interview is about Rahul, not Modi.
No, but
look at it. You got Bombay, they got Pathankot. So Pakistan is a very difficult
Priya,
neighbor to deal with.
I'll come to the foreign policy. I'm answering your question about consistency.
Right.
Rahul Gandhi, on his social, political and economic views, has demonstrated consistency. And that's what counts in political leadership. Prime Minister Modi, let me give you his economic list of consistencies. For 7 years when UPA was in power, Prime Minister Modi as Chief Minister of Gujarat was opposing GST. Today he's pro-GST. Under his leadership, the government was opposing the insurance amendments bill. Now they pro it and we helped them pass it, by the way.
But now you are opposing it. Look at the
we helped them pass it. We helped them pass it as soon as they came to power. We are not opposing GST.
You're not saying, yes, this Rahul saying 15 minutes mein main pass kar dunga. If you agree to my saying, it's like holding a gun to their head.
But do we not have a right to represent the people of the country who voted us in power? Do we not have the right as a responsible opposition?
But
we've not changed our drafts. Our drafts, contrary to their spin and media sort of spins, we are still consistent with what we demanded. And let's assume there are changes in what was the UPA bill with the NDA, with what Congress is demanding today. Is there anything wrong with that? There's nothing wrong in having a rethink on an issue. The question is...
You do a rethink, they become inconsistent.
No, there's a big difference. The difference is, when the land acquisition bill, for instance, was passed in 2013, I was a member of parliament at that time. And I remember the BJP benches joining us together, Sushma Swaraj in the Lok Sabha, at least where I was voting, worked with the UPA, we helped pass that bill. When Prime Minister Modi came to power, on day one he had a rethink. Nothing wrong in that. He is entitled to have a rethink as a new Prime Minister. But look at the way he went about trying to implement that rethink. He said 3 times I will promulgate an ordinance. to hell with Congress and the entire opposition. I think this is right. I'll change and amend this law in a completely undemocratic manner. Look at where it left him.
No, granted.
He put all his economic reform eggs in the basket of land acquisition bill, and it got him a slap on their face.
Okay, more on the budget session, but we need to take a short break. But we're going to come back and talk to Milind Deora about the budget session and also very quickly about the state of the Congress in Mumbai. Welcome back. We are in conversation with Congress leader Milind Deora. Milind, before the break, you were saying that the Congress, if the government reaches out and talks terms on GST and other issues, the Congress is not in the interest of disturbing the House or causing disruptions. But my point is, the budget session is coming. Forget GST now. What about the budget? What are the expectations the Congress has from the budget?
Well, I can tell you what expectations I have in a personal capacity.
Yeah. And given the fact you represent, South Mumbai.
Well, personally, I think there are certain issues in our country today that economically that we're facing. I mean, rural growth, rural demand is very slow. When we were in power, for instance, Manrega could have been criticized, but what it led to was massive rural demand. So the government must find a way to boost rural demand. They must find a way to put more money in the hands of the rural community, because rural spend is very important to boost this economy. I think on a tax side, it's very important that they chart out a roadmap for simplification of taxes. This government, when they would talk to foreign institutional investors, to the private sector, they would accuse the UPA of tax terrorism. They said tax harassment under UPA was on the rise. There's a retrospective tax regime. In the last year and a half of Modi Sarkar, tax harassment, if you talk to any businessman in India today, you talk to chartered accountants, has increased monumentally in the last year and a half. People are being harassed for undue cases. You talk to businessmen are fleeing India and saying we want to become NRIs overseas. Entrepreneurs, as I said, are setting up companies headquartered in Singapore and Dubai, so that they can escape the hassles of setting up companies in India. Ease of business in some ways is getting worse in India. And on top of that, when the government imposed MAT retrospectively, that dampened spirits with investors, Indian and foreign. So I think if this government really spelled out a benign, forward-thinking tax regime, which, as I said, I'm not saying compete with a Dubai which doesn't have any tax. But even if you charge a tax, but you simplify the process by which you charge tax, remove the ability for an officer to harass a company.
Why didn't the Congress do all this? Especially this simplifying
the
tax.
Congress did a lot of these. The Congress did a lot of these things.
But that's not something that really stood out.
No, Priya. The point I'm making is it's gotten worse in this government, and this government is apparently, at least that's what I hear in the market, is they are pro private sector and pro ease of doing business, but ease of doing business has gotten worse in India. So on the ground, regardless of what this government says, when you talk to not just entrepreneurs, to even large companies and promoters of well-established companies in the manufacturing space, services space, they are saying it's becoming more and more difficult to do business in India. And I just feel that if they put a lot of their attention during this budget and perennially, not just once a year, into making it easy to do business, making government smaller when it comes to business, I think you'll really see a lot of growth. I think this government, their philosophy on the economy really is, like recently I was at an award function, a media award function in Mumbai, and there were the finance minister and many other senior leaders of this government. They tried to blame the opposition for the economic problems of this country. And that's not a stand we ever took when we were in power. In the last 2-3 years of UPA, when
you are blaming Modi for GST as a CM.
No, I'm saying that but we didn't we said when the last 2-3 years of UPA, when things were a little difficult economically, when we had oil prices at $130, $140 a barrel, and now they have it at $28 or $29 a barrel, we weren't blaming the opposition. We were still reaching out to the opposition. So the onus always lies on the government to pass legislation. But if the government is at every time formulating a strategy to pass legislations that are of critical concern to India, whether it's GST or another legislation, by trying to isolate the opposition, by trying to
But
humiliate
they
the
invited
opposition.
you for tea, that famous GST tea. You know, there was a reach out, and after that, nothing has happened. Sonia Gandhi was asked recently in Parliament. She said, "We are still thinking about it." You know, she was in an informal chat with reporters. So, has that committee met? Have you done something?
I can tell you at a personal level, with my interactions with Mrs. Gandhi, with Rahul Gandhi, and Rahul Gandhi said this recently publicly as well. They are committed as ever to passing GST. They are committed as ever to implementing
In
economic
15 minutes,
reforms.
but
They are committed as ever to implementing economic reforms that we proposed when we were in power for a decade. We are not a U-turn party, unlike this government. We won't say something when we're in power and then do something else when we're in the opposition. We don't have that record. But as I said, everything requires consensus. This government's attitude has been to isolate and not to engage with the opposition. You may have a tea party and you may call somebody for tea, but when we put forward our concerns and our suggestions, we have to hear back from the government formally. The government has to formally respond to us and say, we can work around this, we can't work around this is something which can work, can't work. We haven't heard a formal response from them as yet. All I hear personally is different leaders of this government, different ministers, talking to television channels and blaming the opposition. That's not going to help. So ultimately what people will remember is, did this government pass economic reforms or not? And I think this government will have a credibility crisis in the years to come. If they are unable to pass GST, people will blame the BJP, one, for opposing GST when they were in the opposition and UPA was in power, and two, for being able to consult, work in a democratic, constructive manner with the opposition and pass GST when they are in power.
it's a two-edged sword, no? People may even blame the Congress for being an obstructive
Perhaps they
force
will,
in the GST.
but that's unfortunately a media spin that they're suggesting. Which we've been saying it, screaming from rooftops that we are keen to pass GST.
Okay.
And I repeat my point that the proof is in the pudding. If we were against implementing these laws, we would have not allowed the insurance bill to get passed almost a year ago.
Well, I wanted to talk to you about state of politics in Bombay, but I'm afraid we run out of time. So thank you for talking to us.
Thank you, Priya.
And thank you for watching this edition of Cover Story. We'll see you again, same time next week.